This week, I wanted to try something new. In an attempt to streamline my process with working with resin, I decided to try out one of these silicone molds that I found online. I believe it's for cake or meatloaf, but I'm going to be using it for resin. I cut this piece of styrene to the same dimensions as the mold. I'll be using it as a template and base for the rocks. I found this little tentacled creature at the hobby store near my house. I think it's for D&D, but I think I can fit it into this universe. Let's see. It works, it doesn't. Works, doesn't. Works, it... It works. I wanted to extend the reach of the tentacles, so I got out some Sculpey and I used North of the Border's trademarked wormy dealies that I poked some little circles into to create 6 suction-cupped tentacles. I posed them in a way that looked kinda natural. Once I had all 6 of those made, I threw them in the oven to get them nice and hard. Then I glued them back onto the monster. Next, it was time to make some rocks. I grabbed some scrap XPS foam and began cutting it into rock-like shapes. I stacked up a few layers on both sides, and I wanted to have 2 large rocks and some smaller ones. And on one of the larger rocks, I wanted to have a little staircase that looked like it was carved out of the stone. After I was done with that little staircase, I glued everything together. Once the foam layers were glued together, I began sculpting them to look more like a uniform rock with cracks and crevices that tied all of the layers together. I then mixed up a plaster paint and Mod Podge mix to coat the rocks. I like to make it nice and thin when I'm applying it to rock surfaces, that way it gets into all of the details. I make it thicker when I'm building up terrain and filling gaps. My apologies to my friend Tinu for causing him a slight craft catastrophe by not explaining that a little bit better. He just started his 2nd season on his channel. You should definitely go give that video a watch after you're done with this one. I then primed the monster and added a dark gradient to the bottom of all the rocks. This monster was inspired by a conversation I had with my cousin James. He asked when I was going to include some kind of tentacled monster in the Wild West, and I said, hey, it's hard to find tentacles in the Wild West, and he said, what about the coast of California? And I thought that was a great idea. Went to Big Sur a couple years ago, and I thought it was beautiful. So that is the terrain inspiration for this build. I coated the mold with a silicone spray to act as a mold release, and then it was time to mix up and pour the resin. After the resin had been poured and all of the bubbles were popped, I covered it and I left it to cure. And it was time to move on to the little building. I'm not really sure what kind of building this is. Kind of made it up as I went, but I made the 4 walls out of balsa wood that I carved some panel lines into. I brought out the grain with a wire brush. I gave it a little door made from some styrene. I glued the 4 walls together. I glued those down to a little base. Added some trim and I capped it off, and then it was time to start adding the details. I wanted a tower with a platform and antenna on it, so I made that from a short brass pipe and a sprue piece. I made some rail supports, bent a brass wire into an Easter egg dunker. I snipped that off and then I glued it to the supports, and I had a little brass railing. I then added a piece of metal mesh to create the standing surface, and I glued the tower structure to the main building. I also made a little ladder out of some plastic canvas so that the outpostman could have access to his platform. I reinforced the platform with some posts, and I went crazy with the greeblies. Let me know in the comments what you think this outpost could be for. Also, let me know what this big thing on the side of the building is for. I like to think maybe it's a generator of some kind. Yeah, I don't know. I want to hear from you guys. I then, of course, added some guitar strings to connect various elements together. This is always very fun to bend. It can be a little finicky when you get a bend wrong, and then it just doesn't fit right. Luckily this time everything fit pretty well. I added a few more little details here and there, and after I felt like it was thoroughly greeblied, maybe too much, that was the building done. Also made some steps to go up to the front door, and it was time to make the bridge. I used the tracks from a tank model that I had as the base for the bridge. I shaved off a little bit on either side, and I glued down some strips of balsa to make the planks. When I was done with that, I had a nice flexible bridge that bowed nicely in the middle. I grabbed this little model to be the Outpost man, took everything aside, and I primed it. After the prime, it was time to start painting. I started with brown for all of the wood, and I wanted a little bit more color variation on this building, so I painted the mechanical portions with a red, yellow, and orange. I tied the paint job all together with some washes and a khaki dry brush. After I had finished the Outpost, it was time to paint the Outpost man. I gave him a brown hat, a green shirt, some black pants, and some brown boots. By the time I was done painting, the resin had cured enough to add some water effects to the surface. I used these water ripples from Woodland Scenics. I stippled those on with a paintbrush, and then I left that to cure. After the water effects and the resin had completely cured, I popped those out of the mold like a big ice cube. After that was out, I cleaned up the messy edges with my X-Acto, and the sides had cured a little bit cloudy, so I gave those a layer of a gloss clear coat, and that brought back a lot of nice clarity. I then added some scenic glue and sprinkled on some flocking to bring a little bit of life to the tops of these rocks. I also added some little red flowers. I think the guy on the island planted these, and he considers them his little lucky roses. I then glued down the outpost and the bridge, as well as a little dock and a boat. I also reinforced all of the platforms that stuck out over the edge, some little support beams. I added the guy to the outpost. I added some trees and some white water around the rocks, and I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out, as always, to my patrons for their continued support of this channel. Appreciate you all very much. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.